your son, your only child Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah. There you shall offer him as a burnt offering on the mountain. I will point out to you. First, we have this morning from the book of Genesis, chapter 22, verses 1. One of the most difficult, most confusing passages in the Bible is the story of Abraham and Isaac, as recorded in the book of Genesis, chapter 22. Part of it we read in today's first reading. Therein, God demanded Abraham to sacrifice his son Isaac as a burnt offering. Without hesitation, asking no question, no sign of doubt, no sign of surprise or anger, Abraham was willing to sacrifice his son Isaac as requested by God. This story causes us to ask some troubling questions. What kind of God will make such a demand to sacrifice a child as a burnt offering? Because the whole request seems to run contrary to the very nature of God. God who loves life, God who gives life, God who protects life, God of love, God of compassion, asking that a man should sacrifice his son as a burnt offering. On the other side, why was Abraham so willing to sacrifice his son Isaac? In our language, was he such a dummy? As troubling and confusing as this story might be, we must not forget that the story of Abraham willing to sacrifice his son Isaac remains one of the greatest faith stories ever recorded in the history of human salvation. And this story must be understood within its own special context, prophetic context. Because the story of Abraham, so willing to sacrifice his son, foreshadows the sacrifice God himself will later make centuries to come of his only begotten son, Jesus Christ. So the sacrifice of Isaac foreshadows the sacrifice of Jesus Christ, being the only begotten Son of God, done for the redemption of the whole world. Although the Bible tells us that when God demanded Abraham to sacrifice his son Isaac, God was only testing Abraham's faith. But we must know that Abraham didn't know that that was only a test. He saw it as it came, and he was ready to do it. Humanly speaking, therefore, what God asked Abraham to do was difficult, was odd, was awkward, was really difficult and hard. Yes, Abraham was very willing to do that. Why? Before we come to that, why is that request very difficult? Why is it remarkably difficult? It is difficult, number one, if you understand how Isaac was born. Abraham married Sarah, his wife, and they lived together without any offspring, without any child. Although they had friends, they had cousins, they had also servants, but they strived and longed for a child of their own, but they never had. Then, remembering that in Jewish culture also, a childless marriage is like a forced marriage. There was usually a cultural and social stigma associated with a family that has not got a child, especially a son. So Abraham and Isaac lived through this. And all of a sudden, when God saw their faithfulness, he made a promise to them that he was going to give them a son. And then Abraham and Sarah waited patiently, praying to God, crying out to God for another 25 years before the promise was fulfilled and the son was given to them. So by the time Isaac was born to Abraham, or by Abraham, Abraham was already 100 years and his wife Sarah was 90. So you can imagine the joy of having a child at that age. You can imagine the celebration. You can imagine the relief, the freedom the birth of Isaac brought to them. Then all of a sudden, God asked that the child also be sacrificed. So it was really difficult when we consider how Isaac, the child of a promise or the child of promise, came to be. Secondly, it was a difficult request because Abraham was asked to kill, to sacrifice his only son. There were two. He had no extra. He had no spare. There was no alternative. There was none again besides Isaac. And God has made a promise to him, Abraham. Through your son Isaac, I'm going to bless you and bless your lineage and bless your descendants. So losing Isaac was not just losing an only son. He was also losing his lineage. He was also losing his security. He was also losing all the promises made to him, because Isaac was a sign of that promise, that the promise I made to you will fulfill. So it was difficult losing an only son. It was difficult losing a lineage. It was difficult losing a promise. Finally, it was difficult because he was asked to sacrifice a son that he loved. Not just an only son, but a son he loved. And as we read in the first reading, it was remarkably and boldly and obviously written. Take your child, your only child Isaac, the son you love. You know, it is very difficult ordinarily to lose a beloved one. It is difficult for a parent to lose a child. Then it is more difficult to ask a father or a mother to sacrifice their son or their daughter. The trauma, both psychological and emotional, is out of this world. But Abraham was willing to do that. Why? Because having worshipped God for years, having followed God, having established a relationship with God, Abraham has come to know the character of God. He knew, he was convinced that God wouldn't deceive him. He knew and he was convinced that God was not going to disappoint. So, sacrificing Isaac was not so much a difficult thing for him because he had known the character of his God. And that was why, when they were moving to the place of the sacrifice, to the mountain, Isaac, who was not aware of the arrangement of the decision or the conversation between his father and God, asked his father innocently, Father, you said we are going to the mountain to make a sacrifice to God. So where is the lamb for the sacrifice? If we are going to make a sacrifice, where is the animal with which we are going to make the burnt offering? And Abraham turned to his son and said, don't worry. When we get to the mountain, God himself will provide. Abraham knew that when he gets to the mountain, something greater than Isaac will happen. Even if he means sacrificing Isaac, he knew that he will not come back to his home empty-handed. Why? Because he has come to understand the nature, the character of his God. That this God that I'm obeying is not going to deceive me. That this God that I'm obeying is not going to disappoint me. So I'm willing to give Isaac, because in return, I don't know what he's going to provide. I don't know how he's going to do it. But I know that on that mountain, he's going to make a provision for me. And that is why, when that experience ended, God revealed himself to Abraham and said to him, beside all the names you have known me with, I am also God, Yahweh, Jireh, which means God who provides. Because you trusted that I'm going to provide, despite there was no sign that I'm going to provide, that despite there was no communication that I'm going to provide, yet you trusted because you have known me. And as we read in the reading today, he was so handsomely rewarded for his obedience, for trusting. You know, interestingly, God has a history of asking his followers, his people, to do something remarkably difficult for him. Besides Abraham and the request God made of him to sacrifice his son, there is also another man, interestingly, in the Bible called Hosea. Hosea was a prophet. He wanted to get a wife. And God said to him, now you want a wife. I'm going to show you the person you're going to marry. And her name is Julia. She's a professional prostitute. You are going to marry her, and she's not going to change. She's going to be unfaithful to you in the morning. She's going to be unfaithful to you in the afternoon. He's going to be unfaithful to you in the evening. And you're not going to divorce her. You're going to marry her and she's going to be your wife. That was very difficult. But Hosea said, okay, I accept your proposal because I know that out of this experience, something greater, something remarkable is going to come. I know because out of this experience, you're going to reveal something to me. And it happened, not just to Hosea, but also to the whole house of Israel. There was also this prophet known as Ezekiel. Ezekiel was such a faithful prophet. But all of a sudden, God said to Ezekiel, you have got a wife. I'm going to take away your wife. She's going to die. But you are not going to grieve. You are not going to weep. You must not mourn her. Do not open your mouth. Ezekiel said, I'm going to lose my wife. And you're asking me that I shouldn't weep. I shouldn't mourn. It is difficult. However, since it is coming from you, I accept. It's difficult because I know beside this, out of this experience, something great is going to come out of it. You are teaching me something. And when God wanted to send his son into our world, he saw a humble lady who was innocently virgin. And God said to her, yes, you are a virgin. I'm going to respect your virginity, but you are going to be a pregnant virgin. It's a difficult task, difficult request, but you're going to do it. The woman Mary was so disturbed. But she said at last, let it be so, because I know out of this experience, you're not going to deceive me. Something great is going to come out of it. Not just for myself, but for the entire world. And the same God who asked Abraham a very difficult task to do, who gives Hosea, Ezekiel, and others who made a very disturbing demand, is still making a very difficult demand on us, is to get followers. What is God asking me to do that is difficult? To pick up my phone and ring that friend of mine who betrayed me, although I feel hurt, but God is asking me to do the calling. It's not easy. It's not ordinary. Is God asking me to forgive my ex-partner, my ex-wife, my ex-husband unconditionally? It is difficult. Is God asking me not to leave my marriage, to stay there and work it out? Despite the fact that my partner is not so romantic, it's not caring, it's very selfish. Is God asking me to stay there? It is difficult. But that is what God is asking. Is God asking me, Nathaniel, to leave the priesthood? And I'm not leaving it. To leave the priesthood, because the bishop doesn't like me, or the priest doesn't like me, or my parishioner doesn't like me, they do not like me. Is what God is asking me to stay, despite all these obvious signs? It is difficult, but I must hear this voice. Is God asking me to reach out to a member of my family who hurt me, and we are no longer in talking terms, and he wants me to be the first one to make the call? It is difficult. God has already demanded something difficult from his people. It didn't start with us. But the thing is that sometimes we don't oblige him because we have our reasons not to do it. We have our logic why we shouldn't do it. We feel that it doesn't make sense. We feel that it is difficult. The same hard request was made of Abraham, and was willing to do it because he has understood the character of his God. That although it was difficult, but God wasn't deceiving him, and he was not going to deceive him. Dear friends, Isaac was Abraham's son. We can also take it from the other side. Isaac could also become something symbolic. Is God asking me to identify and sacrifice and do away the Isaac that I love in my life? That thing that I love so much, that I think that when taken away, my security is gone. But God is asking me, Nathaniel, let it go. Is God asking me to sacrifice that Isaac that I think that is the only thing I have? And God is asking me, Nathaniel, let it go. Is God asking me, although you got this by through your hard work, and I know the history, but now is the time to leave the Isaac and sacrifice him. Is God asking me to leave it, and I'm having my own reasons? This is Lent. And as I said last week, it's a season when people give up something and when people take up something. As we continue our Lenten journey, what is God asking me to do that is difficult? Is that aspect of my moral life that is not very good, but I find so much pleasure in it? And God is saying, Nathaniel, no, take that away. And I think if I leave that aspect of my moral life, I'm not going to be happy again. What is God asking me to do? Is it difficult? Like Abraham, am I willing to give in, trusting that God will make provision for me? Or am I like the normal person saying no? It is difficult.